April 13th, 2017, 7:32 p.m. local time. A cargo plane is flying over the mountains of Nangarhar province, and the rear cargo door is open. On the ramp at the back of that aircraft is a 30-foot bomb strapped to a wooden pallet. The crew chief releases the restraints. A drogue chute deploys. 21,600 pounds of explosive rolls out the back of the aircraft and starts falling. 96 men are inside the tunnels below. They have seconds left. None of them know it. Today, we're watching the most intense airstrike footage ever recorded. If you were inside the cave that night, the first thing you would have noticed was the floor moving. By the time you registered the sound, the second impact was already on top of the first, and the third was on top of the second. 16 Super Hornets from the deck of the USS Harry S. Truman were 35,000 feet above the 14 ISIS Somalia operatives in that cave, dropping 124,000 pounds of ordnance on their position in 120 seconds. That was February 1st, 2025. Northern Somalia, the largest single airstrike from any aircraft carrier in history. 50 miles southeast of the city in the Golis Mountains, there is a man named Ahmed Malininine, Omani-born, ISIS Somalia's senior recruiter and external operations chief. He is in a series of cave complexes carved into volcanic rock. Those caves have held against everything Somali ground forces have ever thrown at them. Drone strikes have only scratched the surface. Malininine has every reason to believe he is safe. He is not. About 700 miles to the east, off the coast of Yemen, the USS Harry S. Truman is steaming through the Red Sea under the command of Captain Christopher Chowder Hill. The crew is sharp. The Air Wing, Carrier Air Wing 1, commanded by Captain Leslie Mintz, has been flying combat sorties for weeks. Tonight, Mintz is about to launch the largest single bombing run in the entire history of carrier aviation. Not one of the largest, the largest. 27 FA-18 Super Hornets roll out of the catapults in sequence. 16 are loaded for the strike. The other 11 are escort, ISR, and electronic warfare. Air Force KC-135 tankers are already in the air, holding orbits to refuel the strike package on the way in. One of those tankers, a KC-135R serial 580001, gets briefly tracked on a public flight monitoring site near Somalia. That is how the rest of the world will eventually figure out something happened tonight. The flight in is 2 hours. The Super Hornets cross over Somali. With the federal Somali government, they reach the cave complex. They roll in. In the next 120 seconds, those 16 jets drop 124,000 pounds of ordnance on the target, 62 tons, mostly Mark 80 series bombs with JDAM guidance kits, nearly the carrying capacity of 2 B-52 strategic bombers delivered from a single carrier in 2 minutes flat. From altitude, the cave complex looks untouched. Then the first impact, then a chain of 14, 15, 16 detonations rolling across the mountainside in less than 2 minutes. The thermal feed shows the mountain itself shifting. By the time the dust clears, 14 ISIS Somalia operatives are dead. Malininine is one of them. The pipeline he built across 2 continents dies with him in that cave. CENTCOM and AFRICOM keep the announcement quiet. The press release is 3 sentences, no tonnage and mention of the record. Months later, in May, the acting chief of naval operations, Admiral James Kilby, is talking on a panel at the Council on Foreign Relations and lets the truth slip from the podium. He calls it the largest airstrike in the history of the world from a single carrier. The Navy walks the wording back the next day. The number doesn't move. Captain Mintz's aviators were back on the deck inside the hour. They reset for the next mission and started launching toward Yemen. 11 weeks later, the same aircraft, the same Captain Mintz at the helm, would prove that February 1st was not a one-time peak, it was a baseline. April 17th, 2025. Truman is now off the coast of Yemen instead of Somalia. Captain Mintz's aviators have been flying around the clock for weeks. They are now leading the kinetic edge of Operation Rough Rider, the Trump administration's intensified air campaign against the Houthis. ordered by Secretary of Defense Pete. Hexathan run for 53 straight days. The target tonight is Ras Isa. From above, it looks like an ordinary fuel port on Yemen's western coast, 55 kilometers north of Hodeidah. It isn't. Underneath those storage tanks, intelligence has identified weapons smuggling lines, a command and control hub, and a stockpile of munitions destined for the same hands that have been firing on commercial ships in the Red Sea for over a year. The target package took months to build. Tonight it executes. 9:41 p.m. local time. FA-18E Super Hornets cross the coastline. EA-18G Growlers from VAQ-144 are already in front of them, jamming Houthi radar and communications into noise before the first weapons release. Inside the Houthi air defense network, screens are static, radio calls fail, the bubble closes around them and they don't know. What the Super Hornets are carrying is what makes this strike technically historic. For the first time in this theater, U.S. forces are putting the GBU-72B Advanced 5K Penetrator into combat, a 5,000-pound bunker buster designed to bridge the gap between the standard 2,000-pound JDAM and the 30,000-pound MOAB. Faster, smarter, more lethal than anything in its weight class. Ras Isa is its operational debut. The first impact is a clean white flash. Half a second later, the tank ruptures. The fireball that follows is bigger than the buildings around it. By the time the 14th aim point is hit, the entire port is one chain reaction. Fuel cooking off into the missile stockpile. The missile stockpile cooking off into the next tank. From 50 miles offshore, the glow on the horizon is visible to merchant vessels at anchor. Out at sea, 2 destroyers from Truman's escort screen open up their vertical launch cells. Tomahawks drop down to terrain following altitude and skim the coast toward the southern edge of the port to finish what the bombs couldn't reach: underground tunnels, relay, sites, smugglers in places the JDAMs couldn't touch. The tunnels collapse. By morning, Maxar Technologies satellite imagery shows the result: multiple oil tanks vaporized. The jetty cratered, scorched rectangles where fuel truck staging areas used to be. The death toll is heavy and disputed. Houthi-aligned media reports over 150 wounded, many of them, by their account, dock workers and paramedics caught in secondary strikes. CENTCOM's official line acknowledges only the strategic objective: eliminate the source of fuel. Independent monitors, including Air Wars and Amnesty International, later flagged the strike for review. The truth is somewhere in the satellite imagery and the propaganda, and no one outside CENTCOM has ever published a full picture. What is not disputed is what happens next. Houthi radio chatter drops to nothing. The usual revenge salvo at Eilat doesn't come. And on May 6, less than 3 weeks after Ras Isa, a ceasefire is brokered through Oman. The Houthis stop firing on U.S. ships. The U.S. stops bombing them. The 15-month war on commercial shipping in the Red Sea ends. On the strength of one night, 14 aim points, 4 aircraft, 1 carrier, 1 15-month war, finished. That is what saturation looks like. But intensity isn't always about the count. Sometimes it comes down to one weapon, one cargo plane, and one decision. The bomb is 30 feet long and weighs 21,600 pounds. It does not fit inside any aircraft in the United States arsenal. The only way to deliver it is to strap it to a wooden pallet, load the pallet onto the cargo ramp of a propeller-driven plane, and roll it out the back like freight. It had been sitting in a hangar in Afghanistan for years, waiting. On April 13, 2017, it stopped waiting. The target is a tunnel complex in Achin district, Nangarhar province, in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The tunnels were originally dug by the CIA in the 1980s for the Mujahideen. 3 decades later, ISIS Khorasan province moved in and turned them into a fortress. Afghan commandos had been trying to clear them out for months and getting cut to pieces every time they tried. IEDs in every doorway, ambushes around every corner. The doctrine on the ground was simple: drag every fight underground where American air power had nothing it could use. That doctrine worked, right up until General John Nicholson, the commander of all U.S. forces in Afghanistan, picked up the phone and asked for permission to use a weapon nobody had ever dropped in combat. The answer came back yes. The footage you see now is the moment of release. From a surveillance asset orbiting overhead, the aircraft is a Lockheed MC-130, operated by Air Force Special Operations Command. The crew opens the rear cargo door, a drogue chute deploys, and 21,600 pounds of explosive rolls out of the back of the aircraft like a piece of palletized cargo. The official designation is GBU-43B Massive Ordnance Air Blast. The crew calls it the mother of all bombs. It airbursts above the target and lets the overpressure wave do the killing, and in a tunnel network, that wave is the worst thing that can happen to anyone underground. It travels down the entrances. It goes around the corners, finds every chamber, moves faster than the speed of sound. There is no door that holds it. 7:32 p.m. local time. Detonation. The fireball climbs nearly 1,000 feet into the sky. Trees within 100 meters of the impact point are flattened. The valley fills with a cloud of dust that stays airborne for hours. When Afghan ground forces finally reach the site 2 days later, the count comes back. 96 ISIS-K fighters dead inside the tunnels. By later reporting, more than a dozen of them senior commanders, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Filipino. Pieces of the international network ISIS have been quietly stitching together across South and Central Asia, all sealed inside the same mountain. 0 American casualties and civilian deaths. The MOAB has only ever been used in combat one time. This was it. That was the largest bomb the United States has ever dropped in combat. Now watch what happens when the United States decides not to use a bomb at all. Baghdad International Airport, January 3, 2020, 12:32 in the morning. A Chamwings Airlines Airbus A320 lands on the southern runway. The man stepping off the jet is the second most powerful person in Iran, Qassem Soleimani, commander of the Quds Force, a man on the United States target list for over a decade. Over the last several weeks, he has personally been coordinating attacks on American positions across Iraq and Syria, including a rocket strike at Kirkuk that killed an American contractor a week ago. Soleimani believes he is untouchable. He has spent 20 years moving openly through 3 countries on the assumption that the United States will never pull the trigger on a target this senior. That assumption is about to be the last one he ever makes. Waiting for him on the tarmac is Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, deputy commander of Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces and the head of the militia responsible for the Kirkuk strike. The 2 men climb into a small motorcade, a Toyota Avalon and a Hyundai van, and roll toward the access road that leads downtown. What none of the men in those vehicles know is that the sky above them is not empty. It hasn't been empty for hours. 25,000 feet over Baghdad, an MQ-9 Reaper has been in a holding pattern since before Soleimani's plane touched down. The Reaper itself launched from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. The 2 pilots flying it are sitting 9 time zones away in a windowless ground control station at Creech Air Force Base in the Nevada desert. They have permission and positive identification. The footage you see now is the only public footage of the strike, taken from an Iraqi airport surveillance camera. The 2 vehicles roll into frame. Headlights cut across the asphalt. Then a flash. Then 2 more. 4 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, fired in quick succession from the Reaper above. The Toyota and the Hyundai are gone. The fireball is contained almost entirely to the 2 vehicles. The road around them is barely scratched. This is what the apex of precision air power looks like in 2020. The MC-130 crew flew back to Bagram and landed normally. Their next sortie was a routine resupply run 2 days later. June 21, 2025, just after midnight, Central Time. At Whiteman Air Force Base in rural Missouri, the hangar doors on the 509th Bomb Wings flight line begin to roll open. The man running the entire operation is Colonel Josh Halfway-Tyler. The 14 pilots he has selected to fly the mission have been training for it for years. Drawn from active Air Force and the Missouri Air National Guard, ranks running from captain to colonel. None of them have told their families what they are about to do and whether they are coming back. 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, more than a third of the entire active fleet, taxi out one after another. Each one carries 2 pilots, an inflatable mattress shoved behind the ejection seat so they can sleep in shifts, a chemical toilet with no privacy curtain, and a stack of piddle, packs filled with kitty litter to handle the next 36 hours of human biology at altitude. Flight doctors gave the crew sleeping pills the night before to make sure they were rested. While the 7 aircraft roll east, another group of B-2s is taking off from the same base and heading west across the Pacific toward Guam. That movement is on purpose. It is a deception. Iranian air defense, satellite intelligence services, every reporter in the Pentagon press pool, all of them watching the wrong sky. The flight ahead of the real strike package is 18 hours, one direction. From central Missouri to Iranian airspace, the 7 Spirits will refuel from KC-135 and KC-46 tankers 3 separate times. They will fly under strict radio silence. Over the Mediterranean, they will link up with an escort package that will push out in front of them once they cross into the threat envelope. F-22 Raptors, F-35 Lightning IIs, the 2 most advanced fighters the Air Force operates. Their job is to clear the air, suppress any radar that lights up, and absorb the first surface-to-air missile launches that nobody actually believes will happen. By the time the strike package is over the Iranian border, the operation has grown to more than 125 aircraft. 8 days earlier, the Israeli Air Force had already torn through Iran's long-range radar and air defense network. By the time the B-2s are inbound, there is almost nothing left in the air to see them with. 5 p.m. Eastern. A U.S. Navy guided missile submarine sitting somewhere in CENTCOM's area of responsibility punches roughly 30 Tomahawks into the air. They are headed for the surface infrastructure at the Isfahan nuclear complex. 6:40 p.m. Eastern. The lead B-2 drops 2 GBU-57 AB massive ordnance penetrators on the first aim point at Fordo, 30,000 pounds each. Designed over 15 years by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency to penetrate hardened underground bunkers buried under hundreds of feet of mountain. This is the first operational use of the MOAB anywhere in history. 6 bombers work the Fordo target. 12 total MOABs go through 2 main ventilation shafts. The first weapons blow the concrete shaft caps off. The next punch all the way down into the cascade halls where Iran centrifuges are enriching uranium. The 7th B-2 swings north and drops 2 more on Natanz. A pilot in one of the trailing bombers, on the radio afterward, describes it in one sentence. "This was the brightest explosion that I've ever seen. It literally looked like daylight. Total time on target across all 3 sites, 25 minutes. Iran's Air Force never launches a fighter. Iran's surface-to-air systems never engage. They didn't see the strike. They found out about it from the news." All 7 B-2s flew the 18 hours back. Every aircraft landed at Whiteman the next morning. Asked later what the biggest moment of the entire mission was, Colonel Wiyala, 22 years in the Air Force, hand-selected to run the most complex strategic strike in modern American history, gave one answer. It wasn't the bomb hits on Fordo, it was the moment he knew his crews were back in friendly airspace and safe. Every single person on the receiving end of these strikes had less time than they thought they had, less of a sky above them than they were sure was empty. That is what the most intense airstrike footage on record actually shows you. Now the question, if you had to fly one of these 5 missions yourself, knowing what you know now about what happened, which one would you take? Drop it in the comments. We'll see you in the next video.